Now, this could make sense to us today. We could probably even replicate this particular experiment at home, right? You know, they always see those commercials, don't try this at home. Here's one you probably could try at home, right? Go ahead and buy a new patch and sew it to an old piece of clothing and then wash it. Make sure it's probably cotton, because cotton likes to shrink if you wash it in hot water, if I remember. So try, buy a new cotton patch, sew it to your cotton t-shirt that's very, very old, and wash it in hot water and see what happens, and see if it see if you get some funny results. Okay, all right. But the point that Yeshua is making is that you want to use common sense, but there's a spiritual principle behind his story. So those who are listening to his anecdote, if they're only going to walk away going, wow, this guy's supposed to be some super duper heavy duty spiritual teacher, and all he's talking about is, making sure you use the right patches with your clothing. Okay, no, there's always a little bit more to what Yeshua has to say, right? It's more than just clothing and patches. They go on to talk about, similarly, the new wine needs a new wineskin, because as the new wine expands during the fermentation process, it's going to stretch the wineskin. And this particular story or example is probably distant from what we would do today. I don't know of anyone who still puts wine into wineskins to do the fermentation process. Most people just put it straight into some sort of either wooden keg or some other type of material and then go from there. But back in the day, 2,000 years ago, this is what they used. So new wine in an old wineskin is going to stretch the wineskin, and an old wineskin is going to burst under the pressure of the new wine. If you don't know anything about wine, as it ferments, it forms gases, and it's going to expand. And so if the old wineskin's already reached the point where it's kind of old, it's brittle, might even be slightly cracked, it's certainly past the stretching point, well then if you put new wine in there, it's going to put more pressure on that old wineskin, and you run the risk of bursting the wineskin. And of course, again, we already know it's not about patches, it's not about wine, it's not about wineskins. As good as that advice might sound, right? Most people listening that day are going to go, well, duh, of course we know all of those. Tell us what's the meat behind what you're trying to tell me. Why is this important? All right, so here's where GotQuestions is going to supply their interpretation. Here's what they have to say. These two parables illustrate the fact that you can't mix old religious rituals with new faith in Jesus. Now, on the surface or in principle, perhaps there's a point that they're trying to make. Generically speaking, if you have rituals that are already set in place and disciples that are already used to those older rituals, then it's going to be difficult to try and teach, what's the old idiom we use? Teach an old dog new tricks. So maybe that's what GotQuestions is trying to bank on. They go on to say Jesus' disciples were not fasting. They're going to turn it back around and pull in the other example. Jesus' disciples were not fasting along with the Pharisees and John's disciples. And why weren't they? Because they were now under the new covenant of grace and faith in Christ. And GotQuestions adds this explanation as if it's the given, as if it's the assumption that Jesus is now presenting and teaching and living and walking out and demonstrating a brand new religion, different and distinct from the older religion, that we would call Judaism. So this is the assumption that not just GotQuestions makes. Remember, we looked at Pastor John Piper's example, and he seems to hint in that direction, although I gave him a little bit of leeway that he could be going either way. But let's keep reading GotQuestions.org. As mentioned earlier, Jesus fulfilled the law. Now, they're referencing back to Matthew 5:17. Those of you who followed my commentaries for any length of time already know that I do not believe that Jesus' fulfillment of law equals Jesus' replacement of the law with a new law like the law of Christ, or Jesus' destruction of the law, or setting aside of the law, or dismantling of the law, or rendering it obsolete, or something like that. You guys know I disagree with that particular interpretation of the Matthew 5:17 through 20 passage. I have a teaching on my YouTube channel and on my website and a podcast about that. Maybe I'll put a little card flash up in the upper right corner around this time in the YouTube video so you can go back and watch that on your own.